Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, which is also one of the most well-known. Before we start, please leave a comment letting me know where you are and when you heard this story. We want to know where and when these documented accounts come in. In the fall of 1897, the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia had a strange chill that seemed to settle deep into the bones of everyone who went through Greenbrier Valley. People who lived in the mountains of Pocahontas County always knew that these old hills held secrets, but no one could have guessed the darkness that would soon rise up from Widow's Hollow, a narrow gorge that was made by mountain runoff over hundreds of years, about 12 miles southeast of the town of Marlington. The hollow got its name long before it became famous for bad things: Pocahontas County's local records. The courthouse, which dates back to 1855, said that the area was not good for settlement because of its dangerous terrain and unstable limestone formations. The name came from the narrow path that went through tall rock walls, making it feel like it was completely enclosed. Even during the day, the floor of the hollow was always in twilight. Cordelia Ashworth moved to this forgotten part of the mountains after her husband Matthias died, in the winter of 1895. The couple first lived on a small farmstead that was 3 miles closer to town. But after Matthias died suddenly from what the local doctor, Dr. Jeremiah Holloway, called acute respiratory failure of unknown origin, Cordelia made the strange choice to move to the empty cabin that had belonged to Matthias's dead brother, Barnabas Ashworth. Barnabas was a bit of an outsider in the community because he kept to himself and was obsessed with the limestone caves that made holes in the mountainside behind his house. According to oral histories from the area collected decades later, Barnabas spent the last years of his life exploring and mapping the huge cave system. He said he was doing geological research for a mining company that no one in town had ever heard of. His body was found in his cabin in 1893, and it looked like he died of natural causes. His many notes and cave maps were missing, and Cordelia probably took them when she later claimed the property. The cabin itself was small. Structure made of local stone and wood with 2 main rooms and a root cellar that had been dug right into the limestone bedrock. The property was different because it was close to the mouth of what locals called Ashworth's Cave. This limestone cave opened up like a gaping wound in the mountainside about 50 yards behind the cabin. The entrance to the cave was big enough for a person to walk through standing up, but it turned sharply to the left after 30 feet and went into complete darkness. Cordelia's. People in Marlington were surprised by her choice to move to such a remote area, but mountain people have always respected a person's right to grieve in their own way. People thought that at 38, she was too old to get married again, and since she didn't have any children to carry on the family name, her choice to live alone was seen as sad, but not surprising. What was surprising was how quickly Cordelia seemed to get used to her new situation. Ezekiel Crane, who ran. Cordelia's first trip to town was exactly 1 week after she moved to the Hollow. She worked at a small general store in Marlington and kept detailed records of her customers' buying habits. She bought basic supplies like flour, salt, preserves, and lamp oil, but she also made a few strange requests that Crane wrote down in his ledger, which seemed to confuse him. During a renovation of the building that used to house Crane's store in 1962, records showed that Cordelia asked about buying a lot of quicklime, which was used to keep organic matter from rotting and to get rid of smells. Cordelia arranged for several sacks to be sent straight to her cabin after Crane told her that he usually only kept small amounts on hand for his own use. She also bought a lot of heavy canvas tarps, rope, and what Crane called mining equipment suitable for cave work in his notes. Tobias Garner, the local postmaster, later said that Cordelia started getting letters from addresses in Charleston and Wheeling, West Virginia, and Richmond, Virginia. The letters came very often, sometimes 3 or 4 in a week, and they were always written in the same neat handwriting. Garner said that the letters often had a strange, musty smell, as if they had been kept in a damp place before being sent. This was one of the strange things about them that he remembered years later. As fall turned into the harsh mountain winter of 1897, Cordelia's trips to town became less and less frequent, less and less often. The Marlington Methodist Church kept careful records of who came to services. Cordelia went to services regularly until October, but she didn't show up for the Harvest Festival in early November. In his weekly diary, Reverend Marcus Whitmore wrote that a number of church members were worried about the widow's well-being, especially since she lived alone and the winter was going to be one of the worst in recent memory. The Reverend's diaries, kept in the West Virginia Historical Society archives, give us a lot of information about how the community was becoming more and more worried about Cordelia's situation. On November 18, 1897, Reverend Whitmore wrote, "Mrs. Ashworth's absence from divine services has become a matter of considerable concern among the congregation. Mrs. Prudence Whitmore, my dear wife, has attempted twice to visit the widow in her mountain retreat, but has been unable to locate the cabin in the maze of logging trails that crisscross Widow's Hollow. I have resolved to organize a proper expedition to check on her welfare before the heavy snows make passage impossible. However, this expedition was delayed by an early blizzard that struck the region on November 22nd, dumping nearly 3 feet of snow across the mountain passes and making travel treacherous for several weeks. It would not be until the spring thaw of 1898 that anyone from the community would successfully reach Cordelia's cabin, and by then it would. It was too late to figure out what had happened during those long winter months. In March 1898, melting snow began to reveal trash that had washed down from the upper reaches of Widow's Hollow. Jeremiah Blackwood, a local trapper who regularly checked his lines along the creek that ran through the hollow, found several disturbing items caught in a beaver dam about 2 miles downstream from Cordelia's cabin. Among the trash, there were pieces of heavy canvas tarpaulin that had been ripped and stained with what looked like old blood, several lengths of rope that had been cut or chewed through, and, most disturbingly, pieces of human clothing that Blackwood recognized as belonging to travelers who had passed through the area the previous autumn. Blackwood immediately told the county sheriff, Amos Crawford, about what he had found, and Crawford put together a small group to look into it. Sheriff Crawford's official report was filed with the county courthouse on March. The search party's report from the 15th of 1898 gives a detailed account of what they found when they got to Cordelia's cabin. The cabin itself looked fine, with smoke still coming from the chimney, which meant that someone had recently lived there. However, there were signs of a lot of activity around the cabin that didn't make sense with the presence of just one person. The ground behind the cabin, in the area between the structure and the cave mouth, was heavily disturbed, even though it had just snowed. Snow cover. Crawford's report talks about many places where the earth looks like it has been dug up and filled in again, making an uneven pattern of mounds and depressions that goes from the cabin to the cave entrance. The deep grooves in the ground that looked like heavy objects had been dragged along the same path over and over were even more worrying. When the posse got to the cabin, they found Cordelia sitting in a rocking chair on the front porch, waiting for them. Crawford's description of her looks suggest that the winter had a big effect on her physical and mental health. Her hair, which had been described as auburn when she first arrived in the hollow, had turned completely white. She had lost a lot of weight, which made her face look gaunt and hollow-eyed, which several members of the posse later said looked like a corpse. Most disturbing was her behavior during the first questioning. According to Crawford's report, Cordelia seemed to be in a state of extreme agitation. She often looked towards the cave entrance and muttered to herself, as if she were having conversations with people who weren't there. When asked how she was doing and if she needed help, she said she was busy with important work and that the cave needed constant care. When Crawford asked if he could look at the cave, Cordelia became upset and said it wasn't ready for visitors and that she needed more time to finish her plans. However, the sheriff had the legal authority in these matters, and Crawford continued with his investigation even though she didn't want him to. The entrance to the cave showed signs of extensive modification since Cordelia had moved in. Heavy wooden beams had been added to strengthen the natural limestone arch, and a system of pulleys and ropes had been built that looked like it was meant to move heavy things in and out of the cave. The limestone floor near the entrance showed wear patterns that were consistent with. There were a lot of people coming and going, and the walls had torch marks on them, which meant they were regularly lit. About 30 feet into the cave, where the passage turned sharply to the left, Crawford's group made their first disturbing discovery. The natural cave floor had been systematically dug up, leaving behind a series of rectangular depressions that were roughly the size and shape of a human grave. The excavations were lined with the heavy canvas tarpaulins that Cordelia had bought from Crane's store, and each depression showed evidence of recent use. More horrifying was the discovery of personal effects scattered throughout this section of the cave. Crawford's inventory, documented in painful detail, included clothing, shoes, jewelry, and personal documents belonging to at least 7 different individuals. Among these items were the papers of Hiram McIntosh, a traveling tinker who had disappeared while passing through the area in October, the distinctive brass buttons from the coat worn by Samuel Hendris, a merchant from Lewisburg, who had gone missing in November, and Martha Copeland's wedding ring. Martha was an elderly woman who was on her way to visit family in Pocahontas County, but never made it. The deeper parts of the cave showed signs of even more organized activity. Excavated passages had connected natural chambers, creating a network of underground spaces that went far beyond what the original cave system would have naturally provided. The limestone walls had tool marks that showed they had been used for months. After careful digging, they found several chambers filled with the quick lime that Cordelia had bought, stacked neatly like supplies in a warehouse. In the deepest chamber that was accessible, about 200 feet from the cave entrance, Crawford's group found what looked like Cordelia's workshop. Crude tables made from limestone slabs had stains and tool marks on them that suggested they had been used for butchering. There were also several large metal tubs that looked like they had been used for butchering. The remains of abandoned mining operations that used to be common in the area had a strong smell of decay, even after being treated with a lot of quick lime. The most disturbing thing was the detailed records that Cordelia kept all winter long. She wrote them in her neat handwriting on pages torn from account ledgers, and they listed every visitor to her cabin with great care. Each entry included the person's name, age. The records showed the approximate weight, the date of their arrival, and notes about what would happen to them in the end. They were written in a clinical, businesslike tone that made it seem like the person writing them had no idea what they were really talking about. The last entry in these records was dated March 10, 1898, 5 days before Crawford's arrival. It simply said, "Preparations complete, final arrangements made, accounts settled in full." When Cordelia was shown this evidence, she said, both chilling and hard to understand. Crawford's report said that Cordelia said she was following through on a contract that her late husband, Matthias, had made before he died. She said that Matthias had received letters from business partners who needed certain services that could only be provided in complete isolation. The cave, with its natural preservation properties and complete concealment from outside observation, had been perfect for this purpose. Cordelia said that. She was just finishing up work that Matthias had started, and she had been paid for it through the regular mail deliveries that Garner had seen. When asked for more information about the work, she got more and more upset, saying that her clients had very specific needs that she was legally required to meet. The investigation that followed showed a conspiracy of terrifying size. The letters that Cordelia had been getting were traced back to several funeral homes and medical schools in Charleston, Wheeling, and Richmond. These places, it turned out, had been paying a lot of money to have fresh human remains delivered for anatomical study and embalming experiments. At a time when medical science was moving quickly, the demand for anatomical specimens far outstripped the legal supply, making human remains a very profitable black market. Matthias, it seemed, had become a supplier in this underground economy, using the isolated cave system to process and preserve remains before shipping them to his customers. His sudden death had left Cordelia with knowledge of his activities and a financial incentive to continue them. The isolated location of the cabin, combined with the natural concealment provided by the cave, had allowed her to expand the operation far beyond what Matthias had originally envisioned. Rather than simply supplying existing remains, Cordelia had begun creating inventory by targeting travelers who passed through the isolated mountain roads. The harsh. Winter was the perfect time for her to do her crimes because people could easily blame them on the bad weather and the risk of getting lost in blizzards. The crimes were hard to prosecute because they happened in a remote area, and there weren't many police officers available in Pocahontas County. Cordelia was arrested and held in the county jail in Marlington, while police tried to find all the victims and track down the network of customers who had been getting the remains. However, the case would never go to trial. Cordelia was found dead in her cell on March 28, 1898, exactly 13 days after her arrest. Dr. Holloway's official report said she died of natural causes related to the extreme physical and mental stress of the previous months. However, there were still some things about her death that were not clear. Samuel Thornton, the jailkeeper, said that Cordelia had been acting strange throughout her time in jail, that she was expecting one last delivery and that she needed to return to the cave to finish her work. On the night she died, Thornton heard her talking animatedly to someone in her cell, carrying on what sounded like a long business conversation. When he looked into it, he found her alone, apparently talking to the wall. Even stranger, a letter found in Cordelia's cell after her death was written in her familiar handwriting and addressed to an unknown person. It contained detailed instructions for finding and accessing the cave system. The letter ended with the cryptic statement, "The work must continue." Instructions on how to find and get to the cave system. The letter ended with the mysterious phrase, "The work must continue." The cave has a memory of everything. Someone will get it. Sheriff Crawford ordered the cave to be sealed. Heavy wooden barriers were put up across the entrance, and signs were posted saying that the area was dangerous and off-limits to the public. But these steps weren't enough to keep people who were interested from coming to the site. In the summer of 1898, people who lived there. People in Widow's Hollow said they saw strange things happening around the sealed cave, like digging and building sounds at night, and people carrying lanterns near the entrance every once in a while. Dr. Silas Patton, a geology professor at West Virginia University, got permission from the county to do a scientific study of the cave in September 1898. He had become interested in the case after reading about it in the news. Patton's first survey was meant to find out if the site was dangerous in any way, ongoing public health risks, and to record how much the natural cave system had been changed. What Patton found during his investigation was more than what was in the original sheriff's reports. With dugout passages connecting natural chambers over a distance of almost half a mile, the cave system went much deeper into the mountain than anyone had thought. Several chambers showed signs of recent activity that happened after Cordelia's death, such as new tool marks on the walls and wooden supports that had just been put in place. Death by several months, including new tool marks on the walls and wooden supports that had just been put in place. Patton's discovery of a fully stocked underground workshop in one of the deepest chambers was the most troubling. This building looked like it had been built with a lot of skill and money, unlike the rough tables and tools found near the entrance. Along with the complicated system of pipes and reservoirs that brought running water from an underground metal tables with drainage systems had been put in place. Spring. The chemical supplies were neatly arranged on shelves, and the presence of surgical tools and anatomy books suggested that the person running this place knew a lot about medicine. Patton's field notes, which are kept in the university archives, show how he began to realize that he wasn't the only one in the cave system. On the third day of his exploration, he heard noises coming from deeper chambers that stopped suddenly when he got closer. Marks from tools on the walls looked new, and he found proof that a few rooms had been cleaned and rearranged recently. Patton got in touch with the people who live in the cave on the last day of his planned survey. A man came up to him while he was working alone in one of the upper chambers and said he was Dr. Aldrich Mortensen, a doctor from Baltimore, who had come to West Virginia to continue the anatomical research that had been stopped by Cordelia's arrest. Mortensen said that the cave was a big investment in specialized equipment and infrastructure that couldn't be moved easily. He said that he and a few co-workers had deals with medical schools and research institutions that needed a steady stream of anatomical specimens. The cave was a great place for them to work because it was far away from people and had natural preservation qualities. They planned to keep working there even if there were legal issues in the area. Patton's notes make it look like he was going to tell the police about this conversation at first, but Mortensen gave him a bunch of university documents and letters of introduction that made his actions seem more legitimate. Mortensen also promised Patton a lot of money for keeping the operation a secret and giving him access to anatomical specimens that would be useful for his own geological research. It was never fully clear what kind of deal Patton made with Mortensen, but university records show that Patton suddenly got a big research grant in late 1898. This money let him do more geological surveys in the Appalachian region. His later works on limestone cave systems included very detailed anatomical drawings that were very accurate and advanced for the time. For the next few years, local authorities kept getting reports of strange things happening in Widow's Hollow, but most of the time these reports were ignored as folklore or wrong observations. County officials didn't want to spend money on monitoring an area that didn't seem to pose an immediate threat to public safety because the cave was so far away. But things changed a lot in the spring of 1902, when a group of Methodist missionaries who were passing through the area found signs of new graves in the woods near the cave site. These were different from the shallow holes that had been found in the cave itself. Looked like formal burial sites with rough wooden crosses and neat rows, like a real cemetery. Reverend Whitmore, who had been interested in the case since Cordelia's arrest, put together a group of volunteers to look into these burial sites. What they found showed that the cave's activities had grown much bigger than anyone had thought before. There were at least 30 marked graves in the forest cemetery, and each one had a wooden marker with just a number and a date on it. The dates were between 1899 to early 1902, which shows that operations had continued and gotten stronger since Patton's survey. It was even more disturbing to find a small building that had been built in a clearing about a quarter of a mile from the cave entrance. The building was made to look like a rustic mountain cabin, but it was actually a receiving station where victims could stay for a short time before being taken to the cave facility for processing. The building had medical supplies, restraining equipment, and detailed records of the processing dozens of people over the course of 3 years. These records showed the full extent of what had turned into a complex business. People in cities were being recruited as victims by offering them fake jobs, promising them medical care, or just kidnapping them. They were taken to the mountain facility, where they were processed in ways that met the needs of different customers. The operation had grown to include several doctors, embalmers, and support staff who lived in temporary camps set up in different parts of the forest nearby. The investigation that followed involved federal authorities for the first time, as evidence emerged that the operation had been acquiring victims from multiple states. In June 1902, U.S. Marshal Henry Caldwell led a coordinated raid on the facility. They arrested 7 people and took a lot of documents that showed how the criminal network worked. The raid was only partly successful, though. Several important people, like Dr. Mortensen, were able to get away into the deep cave system before the police could catch them. After 2 federal agents got lost in the maze of tunnels and had to be rescued after 3 days underground, efforts to follow them into the underground passages were called off. Dynamite charges sealed the cave permanently, blocking the main passages. However, federal investigators thought that other entrances might have allowed the core group to keep working from deeper chambers. Reports of strange things happening in the area kept coming in for a few more years, getting less and less often, but never stopping completely. It was never made public that Dr. Patton was involved in these events, but university records show that his research career came to an end suddenly in 1902. His personal papers, which he gave to the university archives after he died in 1924, include a confession letter from 1903 in which he talked about how he helped with the cave operation and how deeply sorry he was for what he did that led to the crimes that followed. Patton said in this confession that he had first thought that he was taking part in real medical research, but over time he came to understand that the operation was getting subjects by killing people instead of using people who had already died. He was so involved in the crimes that he was afraid of being arrested if he tried to report them. The large sums of money he got for cooperating went to help his elderly parents and pay for his sister's medical school, which made him financially responsible for them. It was hard for him to back out of the deal. Patton's confession also gave more information about how big the operation was. He said that the cave facility was just one part of a network that included similar facilities in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. According to customer needs, victims were moved between facilities, and the operation included skilled embalmers who could keep remains for long periods of time and prepare them according to very specific anatomical details. Patton's confession ended with him describing his last trip to the cave in late 1901, when he learned that the operation had grown beyond just getting anatomical specimens. He learned that some customers wanted live subjects for experimental medical procedures, so the cave facility had been changed to meet these needs. Patton had finally cut off all ties with the operation because he couldn't reconcile his continued involvement with such activities. But he couldn't stop thinking about crimes he knew about but couldn't report. The full extent of the cave operation was never fully known because many of the records were lost when the facility was closed. Federal investigators think that at least 100 people went through the facility while it was open for 4 years, but the real number could have been much higher. It was hard to find victims because many of them had been homeless or had moved around a lot. Authorities would not have been told right away about disappearances. For decades after the cave was sealed, people in the area kept reporting strange things happening in Widow's Hollow. These reports usually include sounds of activity underground, occasional sightings of lights moving through the forest at night, and the discovery of things that seem to have been put there recently, even though the area is supposed to be empty. A forest fire that swept through the area in 1923 revealed several previously unknown burial sites in the area around the original cave site. Authorities who looked into these finds found proof that they were much newer than the graves found in 1902. This led to speculation that parts of the original operation might have still been working from other places. But no solid proof was ever found to back up these ideas, and interest in the case slowly faded as the original people involved died and local memories faded. Researchers and other authorized people could only get to the area after it was added to the Monongah National Forest. As part of a larger study of historical crime scenes in Appalachian communities, Dr. Miranda Hullbrook, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Virginia, got permission to do a full survey of the area in 1965. Her digging revealed more proof of the cave operation, such as personal items from dozens of victims and pieces of the high-tech tools that had been used in the underground facility. Most importantly, Hullbrook's survey showed that the original cave system was much bigger than anyone had thought. Ground-penetrating radar showed that there were miles of natural and man-made tunnels through the mountain, connecting many chambers and giving people many ways to get to the surface. The dynamite charges that were used to seal the cave in 1902 only brought down a small part of this system, leaving most of the underground facility intact and possibly open to the public. Hullbrook's finding of a partially preserved lab in one of the deep chambers gave him a better idea of how advanced the medical procedures that had taken place in the cave were. The site had very high-quality surgical tools, chemical equipment for preservation and embalming, and detailed anatomical charts that showed a level of medical knowledge that was much higher than what would be expected in a mountain area that is hard to get to. Personal journals found in the lab showed that the operation's medical director was Dr. Cornelius Ashworth, a distant cousin of Matthias and Barnabas Ashworth. He had apparently been involved in planning the cave facility from the very beginning. Dr. Ashworth was a well-known doctor in Richmond until 1896, when his medical license was taken away because he was accused of doing illegal experiments on patients. His journals showed that he had seen the cave operation as a way to keep doing his research without any rules getting in the way. The journals also showed that Dr. Ashworth had been trying out preservation methods that were much more advanced than the basic embalming methods used for anatomical specimens. He studied ways to keep biological samples in a state that would allow for more research and experimentation. For example, he tried to preserve neurological tissue so that brain function could be studied. Ashworth's notes on experiments that seemed to involve keeping subjects alive during different procedures were disturbing. It seems that certain customers asked for these experiments so they could study how the body reacts in controlled situations. The cave laboratory had very advanced equipment that could have supported this kind of research. Ashworth's notes show that the experiments went on until the facility was finally closed. Hullbrook's last report. In 1967, the University of Virginia received a report that said the whole area should be permanently sealed off and not open to the public. Her findings showed that the cave system had been the site of criminal activity on a scale that had never been seen before in American criminal history. She also said that it would take resources that weren't available for such a project to fully excavate and document all of the evidence. But Hullbrook's suggestions were never put into action. Not long after she turned in her report, she had a severe nervous breakdown that ended her academic career. During her hospitalization, colleagues who visited her said that she had become obsessed with the idea that the cave operation was still going on, and that her research had caught the attention of the people who were running it now. Hullbrook said that she had been getting threatening messages about her research, and that her university office had been broken into several times, stealing photos and other things. Papers from the cave survey. She also said that during the last few weeks of her fieldwork, she had been followed by people she didn't know, and that equipment and supplies had mysteriously disappeared or been destroyed while she was digging. University officials said that these claims were the result of the mental stress of working with such disturbing material. But Hullbrook's field assistants later said that strange things had happened during the project. Someone had messed with the equipment. Several excavation sites had been filled in on purpose during the night, and pictures taken in the deep chambers had been systematically destroyed, even though they were kept in locked containers. In early 1967, the cave survey project came to an end, and all of the research materials were marked as restricted access. Hullbrook spent the last years of her life in a private sanitarium, where she was said to keep saying that the cave operation was still going on and that her research had only found a small amount of evidence. Part of ongoing criminal activities. We still don't know what really happens in the depths of Widow's Hollow. Federal officials say that the area has been thoroughly searched and that there is no proof of any criminal activity going on right now. But people who live in the area still report strange things happening that suggest people are still living there, even though it is thought to be abandoned. People from the Forest Service who patrol the area have seen signs of recent construction work in parts of the hollow that are hard to get to, including new wooden buildings and cleared paths that don't seem to have any purpose for recreation or forestry. Hikers and hunters sometimes hear noises from machines working underground, and a few have recently found areas that have been dug up that suggest ongoing mining or construction work. The most troubling reports are from people who say they have seen people in the woods who don't look like regular hikers or hunters. People often say that these people are very strange, pale, wearing old clothes, and carrying gear that isn't suitable for outdoor activities. When people get close, they usually quickly disappear into the thick forest, often in ways that lead to the sealed cave entrance. Law enforcement agencies say that these reports are either wrongfully identifying real forest users or are based on local legends about the area's scary past. But some sheriff's deputies who have looked into these. Some people who have seen the reports are worried that they show patterns that are hard to explain in a normal way. Rebecca Hartwell, the deputy marshal in charge of law enforcement in the Widow's Hollow area since 1995, says that the area is still a problem for public safety. The cave system is so big that it was never fully mapped, which makes it easy for people to hide illegal activities. Also, the caves are in a remote area, so it's hard to keep an eye on them all the time. Hartwell has recorded multiple occurrences indicative of potential ongoing criminal activity, such as the identification of recently utilized campsites in areas designated as inaccessible, indications of extensive food storage in hidden sites, and sporadic retrieval of personal belongings seemingly belonging to missing individuals from various regions. But extensive searches of the area have never turned up enough evidence to warrant a full investigation. The land is very hard to get around on. The cave system is still partially collapsed and unsafe to enter, and anyone working in the area has shown that they are very good at staying out of sight. It may never be possible to fully answer the question of what really happens in Widow's Hollow. The original cave operation showed that even today, when communication and law enforcement are better, criminal organizations of shocking size can still operate without being caught in places that are far away enough. The Appalachian Mountains have. There are thousands of other hollows that are just as isolated and hard to keep an eye on. The limestone geology that made Widow's Hollow appealing to the first operation can be found all over the area, providing natural cover for things that society would rather not know about. The most troubling thing is probably the fact that the cave operation was able to achieve its main goal, even though there were arrests and investigations after it was made public. The network of customers who was never able to fully identify who had bought samples and services from the facility. The need for anatomical materials and experimental subjects that started the original operation is still there. This creates market incentives for other businesses like it to open in other places. The legacy of Cordelia Ashworth and the horrors that came from Widow's Hollow show us that civilization is often not as strong as we would like to think, in the shadows where the law can't reach. Even though people have a lot of control over their behavior, there are still times when it can go to levels that most people can't even imagine. The mountains remember everything, and some secrets just won't stay hidden. When you walk through the forests of West Virginia, especially in the deep hollows where the sun barely reaches, and the silence seems to press against your eardrums, Remember that these old mountains have seen things that history would rather forget. The limestone caves that run through the bedrock still echo with whispers from the past, and some of those whispers may not be true. A careful observer might notice that some areas seem to be in better shape than they should be for places that are supposed to be abandoned, or that forest paths seem to get more traffic than they should for being so far away. Finding things that clearly don't belong in the wilderness, like medical equipment, chemical supplies, and documents with recent dates, is a reminder that not all of the region's dark history is in the past. If you hear noises coming from under the forest floor or see lights moving through the trees where they shouldn't be, it might be a good idea to remember that some things are best left to other people. The mountains have always kept their secrets, and some of those secrets are safe with guardians who don't want to be bothered. The cave at Widow's Hollow may be closed, but the network it served has shown to be very flexible. In a place where people go missing, people often don't look into missing persons reports for weeks. Travelers often disappear without a trace, and the vast wilderness is a great place to hide things that civilization doesn't want to know about. The work that started with Cordelia Ashworth may still be going on today. The next time you travel alone through the Appalachian Mountains, remember that they have a long memory and are not always empty. Some needs can never be met. Some contracts are never finished.